Hi everyone, Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies here, and another one in my ongoing series charting COVID-19 and what's been happening in the UK from a holistic or naturopathic viewpoint, because there's a lot being talked about the, I guess, the epidemiology, which is, the study of populations, and there's a lot of medical output as well. But this is a more integrative view, I guess, of what's going on in the bodies of people right now. So I've just read a study this morning that was talking about the results from an Australian study that said only 19% of people who get the virus in their system show symptoms. So that makes us 81% asymptomatic, which makes a mockery of what's going on right now with our current model, because what we're doing basically is we're letting people get out and about. So we're releasing lockdown without being able to test them properly, whether they've actually had it in their system. Because unfortunately, the antibody test that was so mooted early on has never turned up. Plus, it wouldn't be very reliable anyway if we did have it, because not everybody produces antibodies, number one. Because if your innate immune system, which is in your gut, is working properly, it will fight off the virus before it actually gets to the second adaptive immune stage where antibodies are formed. So take that information in. Not everybody who gets the virus produces antibodies. So an antibody test doesn't tell you whether you have it or not. The only way to find out whether it's in your system is to test the genome, the DNA, the information in your genes, to see if the genomics of the virus, which is a particular sequence of what's called DNA bases, they're just like letters in an alphabet, exists. And when we've looked at that with other viruses in the past, we've found that the DNA exists in virtually everyone, that herd immunity is not just a concept, it's actually how nature works. And basically everybody in a population would have got it in the past, but you would have lived in much smaller groups, maybe a tribe of 70 to 100 people. Some would have got ill, but probably not as many as have got ill in our lives today, because we live in very different situations. We don't eat healthy food, we don't breathe healthy air and drink healthy water. And plus we're under a lot of stress as a community. But say in a tribe, a few people would have got it and shown symptoms. Some may have died if they were elderly or compromised in some way. Others would have recovered, and some would have shown, the vast majority would have shown no symptoms at all. So that's how herd immunity works. And then it exists then in the genome of the DNA, our DNA, as a sort of constant reminder. And in fact, that's how viruses exist in the world. They kind of push genomic instability. They make us adaptive to our environment. So viruses are not bad per se. They are good and bad depending on the situation and the balance in the environment at the time. So we've really over-egged this idea of COVID-19 being a pandemic, and the WHO, who I originally supported and said, get your information from a good source. I kind of feel now that they are pushing this idea because of their ties to the big business that we won't name, that basically wants to give us all drugs or give us vaccines for something that we possibly could have fought already. Now, the other thing that's really important to understand, and I covered this in the second video more, was the importance of the microbiome and the balance, because viruses, bacteria, fungi, and some parasites exist in and on us, not to cause illness, but to actually enable us to live and function. Sometimes they do cause illness when one thing gets out of balance compared to the other, and it's like all ecology. You only get pests and diseases when things are out of balance. Nature naturally is very well balanced and will look after itself and be sustainable. It's human beings that have come along and said we are bigger and better and brighter than that, and we know better, and we can create scientifically all the things that nature does, which is a huge amount of ego and hubris, really. We have no idea how nature really works. We're just beginning to learn, and we really need to get a bit more humble with what we're doing. So making sure you look after your microbiome could be one of the ways in which you could avoid these lingering effects of COVID-19 that we're seeing in some people, like a post-viral malaise, which we were discussing, myself and some people in the chrysalis effect yesterday, because the chrysalis effect deals with people who've gone through fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue related syndromes, and this kind of feeling completely exhausted is so familiar to people who've had those conditions. That post-viral malaise, which some people are now experiencing from COVID-19, is kind of becoming a crossover. And I noticed there was a GP in the UK who had written in the British Medical Journal, the BMJ, I think it was last week, about his experience of this malaise or fatigue, and how he had a new respect for people with CFSME and fibro, because in the past, obviously, doctors have dismissed it as being all in your head, made up, because they couldn't find the physiological correlates in the body. You know, they couldn't find the thing that had changed or shifted. And obviously, because they're looking at specific parts of the body, and this is a systemic issue. When you feel really fatigued, you have to look at what's poisoning your mitochondria, because mitochondria are at the basis of your energy production in your cells, and they switch on and off according to threat. And threat can be from without, it can be a stress in the environment, you know, if you were being bombed, or there was a fire or an accident or something like that, your body would go into a stress response and shut down your mitochondrial energy production. But it can also be an interior threat. So it can be viruses mounting an immune response. It can be poor nutrition, you know, you're lacking the things that you need to function well. It could be emotional, you know, you're holding on to stuff that you're not really aware of, because it can be very unconscious from childhood experience, a lot of it. So there can be many reasons why the body will deliberately shut down through this network of mitochondria, which are, they're little, formerly were bacteria. So we're coming back to this idea that the microbiome again is really important. But mitochondria were once bacteria that fused with human cells, or, you know, early animal cells, to give us more efficient energy production. And this is an evolutionary adaptation, a sort of coming together of cooperation, this cooperation model, which I've been banging on about for weeks now. This is how nature works. So it finds the best way to do things with the lowest energy expenditure. And bringing a bacterial cell into an animal cell meant we combined the best of both worlds. The mitochondria got shelter, support, and nutrition, and the animal cell got this efficient energy production, because bacteria are extremely efficient at producing energy. And so over millennia, these bacteria became part of the animal cell, and we now call them mitochondria. And they're not just energy factories, they're also sensing, signaling organelles. So they actually put out their own little signals. Sometimes it's little peptides, other times it's little microRNAs, which are tiny segments of DNA bases. RNA is sort of it's the interim structure when DNA replicates into protein. So it's like the middleman in the way DNA is read, and it unzips. It's a double helix that unzips, exposing the bases, and then RNA comes along and sort of replicates the base code, and then that travels off to create protein. It gets made in the ribosomes in your cells. So it's like a factory that creates protein from DNA, and RNA is right slap bang in the middle. So it's a signaling molecule of what's going on in the genome, in the DNA. And if things are going awry in the body, the microRNAs will be popped out from your cells to signal to the rest of the body that something is changing. And if it's a threat signal, that in itself will communicate this message of threat to the rest of your cells, and that will shut stuff down. And that's what I think is going on in COVID-19. And it's this understanding that we have from CFS of the importance of mitochondrial signaling, which is giving us that information, which a lot of GPs don't know. They don't have this specialist information because by their nature, they're trained in general medicine, which is basically how to identify the most common problems and what drugs they need to give you to overcome the symptoms. It's not really about getting you healthier, as we know. And this is a major problem in medicine because we've got more and more chronic illness due to more and more toxicity. Now, in the last video, I did talk about the theory that COVID-19, which is the name for the illness, caused by this secondary SARS virus, CoV-2, might be enacting that through unmasking previous issues on the cells with pollutants, and particularly in the lungs and sometimes in the kidney and liver as well. And that's a very important thing to understand, that we've been given this one cause, one disease model, which is very unlikely. What's going on, it seems, is that inflammation, which is endemic really in our population, where people have leaky guts, they have poor digestion, they have an imbalanced microbiome, they're under a lot of stress, and breathing unhealthy air, often will therefore struggle to keep the body in balance. And when a virus comes along, it's just the final straw which tips the body over into extreme reaction and inflammation, which doesn't turn off. And this is what's happening in COVID-19. So we're in a small minority, it has to be said, a small minority of people. It's something like 15% of the 19% of people that show symptoms get the serious, what's called acute respiratory distress syndrome, the ARDS, where they either find it difficult to breathe, they get hypoxia, low oxygen, or sometimes they also get thrombosis, which is clot forming, and that causes sepsis and organ shutdown. But it's a tiny minority of people. And the worrying, I guess, fear message has been that that's, you know, it's going to happen to you. And the fear of death, therefore, is what's driving this extreme reaction that we're seeing. But in fact, it's down really to the unexplained cases anyway. We can obviously see that many people who've got prior conditions or comorbidities, but the ones that are unexplained probably had systemic inflammation in their guts, and therefore also in the rest of the epithelial layer, which goes into your mucous membranes. It's sort of, you know, in your sinuses, eyes, ears, and so on, would actually be showing this extreme inflammatory reaction because they're already inflamed, but they just don't have a condition. So we can see that this is explainable, and you really have to look after your microbiome in order to overcome this. So please share this information if you like this, and do subscribe. Thank you. Bye-bye.